The Great Canadian Talk Show.
There's only a couple of watts, but I brought the truth to everyone within 3 blocks of the west side of campus.
No way! Yes way!
And now, let's get right down to business with Marty Gold.
Welcome to the Great Canadian Talk Show podcast. This is episode 12 of season 2. I'm Marty Gold, joined by my co-host Spirited Kenny. And this week, all sorts of controversies, mini controversies, unasked questions, unanswered questions, running the gamut from the city, the province. Nothing federal this week, but we're getting pulled in that direction a little bit by some of our listeners. That's probably yet to come in the coming weeks. But all sorts of information, follow-ups on previous episodes, and opening new cans of worms, I think is the term that would be used.
Oh boy, everyone loves their cans of worms, eh?
Yeah, just like a can of Popeye's spinach.
Just like a can of bear spray.
Possibly. As we'll be discussing later in this episode, are we going to be changing the unofficial nickname of Winnipeg from Stabbyville to Macheteville?
I mean, I think it already unofficially is, right? Welcome to Winnipeg. Here's your machete.
Yeah, here's a little side of bear spray for you.
You know what? I was thinking, Marty. Do you remember that time that girl wasn't allowed on the bus because she was short and nickel?
Yes,
it's a good thing these machete wielding people have exact change.
It's not known if they're getting on the bus with their machetes or not. I mean, I can't say I've heard a lot of reports about that, although we might have missed them. Like, anything's possible on a city bus in Winnipeg nowadays, having descended, the city having decayed straight into the pits of hell.
Yeah. What
Look,
is
listen, the easiest comparison, the easiest comparison for me, Kenny, is, I'm regularly going out of the city to host wrestling shows, and you should actually ask me a question about that in a second. And when I go to these other communities, we don't think twice about looking over our shoulders, locking the doors to this. We're unloading the ring off the ring truck. You don't think twice about that stuff in any of these small towns.
Oh no.
Compared to I wouldn't hesitate to walk 3 blocks, in Estevan or Dauphin, for instance, or Morden. I mean, it doesn't even cross my mind. And like, now it's at a stage, and remember, I come from a background where I spent 1.5 years in LA and throughout Southern California at the turn of the century, and Vancouver as well. So, in those municipalities, it was heads up hockey a lot of the time. But in Winnipeg, it was less so, and that comes with the what's the term I'm trying to elaborate on? That comes with the life experience of working around the bar business, working as a cab driver. I already, had some spider sense, and it would tingle. It never goes off on any of these events that we travel to, and it speaks. It doesn't speak of our mindset, of my mindset. It speaks of what's happened to our city and why we are vocal about it.
Yeah, it's pretty sad.
Every day should be as happy a day as, here's your segue, Kenny. Every day should be as happy a day as what we experienced at Rookie Sports Bar in Transcona on Friday night with the King of Transcona Battle Royal. The winners of the opening matches went on to the Battle Royal, and it was full. The biggest ring out for a CWE wrestling event in Rookies history.
Yeah, how was that?
Amazing. Just a sea of people. A lot of the younger wrestlers are drawing in family, friends, and new fans. And the show had what we call heat. There was a lot of vocal disapproval of the first 2 people to appear in the ring and speak to the crowd, Hotshot Danny Duggan, the champion, and his new best friend, James Roth, who in very frank language told the fans what being a nice guy had gotten him. And they look like an unbeatable duo. And it was, as I'm telling you, it was as good as anything I've been involved in the ring in Winnipeg easily in the last 5 years. I mean, it was fire.
Things are starting to ramp up again, eh? Like
they are, and they are everywhere. I'm glad you mentioned that, Brandon. Many of the stars of CWE appeared in Brandon, a show put on by a guy who lives in Western Manitoba, but has been known to make his way in to Winnipeg and to the CWE shows in the western part of the province, and he also wrestles North Dakota. A number of the CWE regulars were on that event, as well as I guess some boys from Saskatchewan, North Dakota. Sellout, apparently 300 people. Vancouver Island, since you asked, I think Vancouver Island Pro Wrestling, which is run by a friend of mine, I think they were in Nanaimo this weekend. They ran 2 shows, both full. And this is you will get shows that don't draw or for whatever reason there isn't big crowds. But in Western Canada this weekend, there were a lot of wrestling fans filling a lot of venues, and a lot of wrestlers had envelopes that were less light, as we put it in the business. It was good all the way around. And if you have a chance to come out to, I'll do the plug now and then get it out of the way. I wasn't really going to do a plug, but the end of March is the next Winnipeg card on March 31st, the Friday night, the day before April Fool's Day. I'll be hosting that show. We were in Eric Rowan formerly of the Wyatt family from WWE fame, the guy who taught Bray Wyatt everything he knows, so he says. He'll be the headliner on that event, along with the various title bouts. And the last time there was full, and the time before that you were there and it was full, Kenny.
Oh, that was
right?
packed.
At the Holy Eucharist Parish Hall.
Yeah. That's a fun place.
It sure is, and it'll be fun again at the end of March. I'll be going on a mini Saskatchewan tour. I'll be catching up with CWE halfway through their tour in Saskatchewan. And I know we have people from Saskatchewan starting to listen to the podcast. I don't know how soon we'll be getting involved in Saskatchewan politics, but I appreciate your kind comments. We have actually
Should we talk slower for them?
No, they're normal human beings, Kenny. Sorry to disappoint you.
I've heard that rumor before, but
they're all he chests. They're all fine. Last night I'll just mention this before we swing into starting off with a look at Winnipeg civic affairs and some things that got us a little bit or more fired up. Last night, the return to Mitchell, Manitoba, because of pandemic restrictions and other factors. Mitchell, a township of 3,000 people just on the outskirts of Steinbach. And we were in the community hall there, and we set up for a decent sized crowd, and ended up having to add like 4 more rows of chairs. It was incredible, full.
That's
Every
awesome.
seat full. We had more in that venue. We had more chairs, but not a lot more space to put them. And what a great, loud, enthusiastic crowd. Lots of kids. I'd say half of them had not been to a wrestling event before. And right from the opening match, they were right into the action. And the surprise of the evening, in fact, happened at the beginning of the card when the crowd learned shortly after I did that not only was I doing the ring announcing, but I got to be the referee.
Oh.
Sometimes card subject to change doesn't just mean the matches per se. It also means what else happens. And our referee is the referee assigned to that show he's one of the better athletes in Manitoba wrestling, and is improving at an unbelievably fast pace. And so he filled in on the card, and I got to fill in as a ref, and I did all 5 matches, and I'm exhausted.
Yeah, I bet. Oh my God.
And I grabbed the barbed wire bat the wrong way as I tried to hurriedly get it out of the way, and got my thumb, and that some of the fans were very entertained by my display of genuine pain and discomfort.
Did you go get a tetanus shot?
No, it didn't. It didn't actually pierce anything. It just cut my thumb. It didn't actually draw blood.
Okay.
So no, I'm safe on that end. But boy, that smarted.
Yeah.
And a good time was had by all nonetheless. And hopefully I won't have to I guess I get to renew my referee's card. And sometime this year I'll be wrestling. I'll be returning to the ring, donning the boots once more. We'll let you people know when that happens, and it'll probably be about 2 days after I find out or something.
Who would have thought a bat wrapped with barbed wire was dangerous?
Oh boy! Imagine lugging that in your luggage going from town to town. Okay.
We got lots of explaining to do. I'm a pro wrestler. Hardcore matches.
A lot of the time, wrestlers they it's a choice for some guys whether you put your title belts weigh a lot, and if you put them in checked baggage, you've got a chance of a problem. when
Right.
your bag ends up in Peoria and you're, wrestling somewhere else. But when wrestlers put it in their carry-on, I've seen the reaction of customs officials. And what's this? That's my title belt, sir. Look at this. And they start showing it off to each other. People have an interesting reaction when they see something like that.
Well, they're cool. They're unique and they're cool,
They definitely unique. Do you have a title belt?
Absolutely not.
Well, neither do I. So that tells everybody where we stand in the world of wrestling.
That's right.
We're going to open up this episode with a look at a couple of things city, and then things that are both city and province, then provincially related, and follow-ups on a previous story in the middle segment, and crime courts and public safety at the end. There was snow and ice removal on the active transportation network. It's labeled public discussion that was held on Saturday from 9 a.m. to noon at the Presentation Theatre, surely not a cheap place to rent, at the RBC Convention Center. Now, this wasn't, as I understand it, posted, because I asked Janice Lukes, Councillor Lukes, who's chair of Public Works, and all this AT, active transportation, snow clearing, plowing, all that stuff falls under her bailiwick now. There's apparently an old Brian Bowman policy that stops the city, prohibits the city from advertising so-called councilor events on the city website. How that contributes to public discussion is beyond me. But Brian Bowman wasn't interested in that. I'll tell you who else didn't seem to be interested in publicly advertising this public discussion to ensure the broadest possible audience and the most complete range of feedback about how much money you should be spending on plowing, bike paths and how often it should be done. I'll tell you who wasn't interested in making sure there was broader discussion. Former chair of Public Works, Councillor Matt Allard, did not tweet this once. Councillor Lukes herself, proponent of this, and was in attendance. She tweeted it from what I could tell. I might have missed one in the last couple of days, I admit, because I'm busy with the shows. But she had tweeted only once on February 7th up until like the middle of last week. Now, to their credit, Councillor Mays, Brian Mays, and Councillor John Orlico, they put it on their websites. It was not on the Bike Winnipeg event page, but about 50 people from the bike lobby showed up. So obviously they were all clued in. A number of city councillors were there. I believe Chambers, I think Devi Sharma was there as well. And I'm going to see what else I can find out about what was said and discussed. But I find it peculiar that other city councillors attended, and I'm going to have to sort of cross match the listing of councillors that showed up with whether they advertise this or not, because you can't, to me, it's good they showed up, but if you didn't advertise it to your own constituents, you're doing them a disservice, because now, for better for worse, Councillor Lukes, in particular, being a councillor in charge of these kinds of things on that committee, they've got a very limited feedback that was all from people. And this is not very different from the Assiniboine bike lane fiasco, where the consultations were completely skewed towards the proponents and deliberately froze out actual property owners, stakeholders in the South Downtown neighborhood. So this isn't far removed, and it shows that there's not a lot of improvement since our day on radio in the last 13 years in the dedication of councillors to ensuring that the public is able to know that there are processes they can participate in and be part of the public discussion. So a big F, and it's not enough on the city of Winnipeg, although Mayor Gillingham maybe wants to reconsider this idea that the city of Winnipeg shouldn't be advertising councillor events. I'm sure there's a rationale that he can provide if he supports this. I assume he supported it when Brian Bowman came up with the idea, but not something that I think, Kenny, either of us would find an acceptable or easily understood practice.
Yeah, I think there needs to be like some sort of PR department to get these things out, because they haven't been doing it
They have a zillion comms people, but they're so focused on A, their own bureaucratic and political agenda, and B, circling the wagons.
Man, if only we could have like
It'd be nice if they worked on something else.
If only we could have like a little thing every time we have an election. Like, did you find that the services that provided from the city of Winnipeg was adequate for getting you information?
Well, maybe somebody will. Will put up a survey monkey.
I would ask Probe Research to do it, but we know that they would just say that Glen Murray won the election.
No, that was CTV. Okay, now next topic. City, but not city, but it is city. And I'll explain that by the time I get to the end of it. I was tipped off ahead of time that a lawsuit has been filed, a statement of claim in Court of King's Bench, seeking $36 million in refunds for fines collected for speeding tickets. And this was narrowed down to a particular time frame from November 20th, 2017 to November 12th, 2021. The end date is, I believe, when the legislation was changed. I'm not sure why November 20th, 2017 was selected. I haven't gleaned that yet, but I know there's a reason. One is so the case doesn't collapse under its own weight, because in reality, the amount of illegal overcharged fines collected by the province as part of the scam photo radar program and other ticketing, I was told would be $150 million. By the time I'm done, you're going to understand why, when people have said for years, why are tickets so expensive in Winnipeg? Why does it cost so much? You're going to find out why, because they were getting ripped off. The lawsuit, filed by a fellow named William Atchison, says the province of Manitoba actively, intentionally, and fraudulently concealed the fact of their collection of the overcharge from the public. Because when they changed the regulation in November 2021, it never told anybody who had gotten a ticket they'd been overcharged or refund any of the overcharged fines. Now, to put this in perspective, in those years, over the course of the previous years, the city issued 131,000 photo radar tickets in 2018, almost 120 in 2019, just over 100,000 in 2020, and 118,000 in 2021. The regulation was amended in 2021, so any fine issued after that time is for every kilometer over the speed limit. The legislation previously, according to the Free Press interview with Naomi Kovac, and I was told this by my own source, she's a Vancouver-based lawyer. Here's how it works. Instead of going, if you're going 11 kilometers over the speed limit before the legislation was changed, okay? So you're going 71 and a 60, 61 and a 50. You are getting charged not for being 1 kilometer over what the law said you should be charged for, because they had that 10-kilometer buffer built in, right? So you'd get charged for being over the 10 over. I hope that makes sense when I type it out later. You should have been charged for 1 kilometer over, $7.70, plus the rest of it. Instead, people were being charged all 11. The exempt, the 10-kilometer buffer, you're being charged. So every single speeding ticket that was issued was overcharged at least $77.70. Now let's using my Fay Hodgman, Joseph Linsky Collegiate High School math, let's use the example of a speeding ticket of going 43 in a 30 in a school zone, okay? We know that at 43, you're going to get, it'll flash on you, okay? So this is a marginal issue. According to what the law was, at 3 kilometers times 770, I'm just going to roughly do it, $23, okay? Now, the surcharges, the victim surcharge is 45%, the court costs are 25%. So the ticket should have been $23, and 45% of 23 is another, say, $10.50, and 25% of the $23 is about $6. Call it $6.50. That would be 23 and $17. The ticket should have been about $40. Let's call it $41. How much were they charging? Well, you're getting dinged for 13 times 770. So that's $101 to start with. But the percentages, because it's 45% of the fine, now that what was a $10 victim surcharge became $45, and the court costs that should have been $5 $5.50 on 23 or something. It's now $25. So a ticket that should have cost $41, the province is collecting somewhere over $172.
Oh my God.
Of $130. Say it again, Kenny.
Oh my God. That's incredible. Like, why did it take so long for them to realize what was going on?
Oh, you've raised an interesting question, because without having read the statement of claim, my information is that at some point the province realized this. They must have realized it to amend the legislation. They wouldn't have amended it otherwise to include every kilometer over, as opposed to only from the 11th kilometer on. So somebody knew at some point. The question is how early. That's not the only question. And it's worse than what I just explained.
Well, the first ticket, that's 43 kilometers. That's over 140, and it should be 41.
At 41, roughly 41, and those tickets, those people were told they had to pay or risk losing their driver's license, 172. That's a real neat extortion racket. Now, you remember when people paid those, I can't remember which tickets they were in Dave Chomiak's time when we were on the air, and it was completely fraudulent. And he went back, he said, no, people, when they pay the ticket, they're admitting they committed the offense. I think it was some fake construction zone or some nonsense like that, right?
Hmm.
And you know, if you pay, you're agreeing that you pay the fine, you committed the offense. Yeah, but when you pay that fine, you're not admitting that that's the correct amount. You're counting on the Crown to put forward an honest calculation, and they failed to do so.
Yeah, like how are you supposed to know?
Yeah, how are you supposed to know? You assume they tell you this is the fine. Are you agreeing that I agree to pay that fine? You're agreeing to pay it on the basis that it's lawful.
Yeah.
And this lands, although it seems to me that this occurred under the NDP government previously, Salinger, and I don't know when this legislation first came into being, so I can't blame it on Gary Dewar quite yet. Although probably it can be. This rests squarely on the shoulders of the Conservative government of the present day. And that's larceny. I can't describe this, and it's worse than what I've described, as I mentioned, because this lawyer from Vancouver says that there's another complication. Tickets issued for vehicles speeding in construction zones are $15.40 per kilometer. So if you got a ticket in a construction zone, you were hit for an illegally hit for an extra $154 off the top. And then 45% of that is another $75, and 25% for the court costs is another like almost $40.
You got to think that if the roles were reversed and they charged you a lower amount and it should have been a higher amount, they're going to come collecting for it.
I wouldn't put it past them. Now, what about the city side of the equation? The province collects the money, remits it to the city takes off policing costs and some other factors from it, and then there's a surplus. The surplus then goes into the general revenue. That surplus in 2021, $7,975,131. In other words, $8 million the city collected. Now, a city lawyer, we all know what that means. It's the province's regulation, this individual said. If there are issues between the city and the photo radar providers, it's up to the province to resolve it. Well, okay, so the city pocketed $8 million and some percentage of that, because the court fines. No, you know what? I'm trying to figure this out. If the surplus, I don't think the surplus included the court costs go to the court, and I don't think the victim surcharge either. I think this is strictly a fine issue, right? A percentage, the net that went to the city was straight from the fines. Some percentage of that is what we used to call ill-gotten booty. Now, while the city can say we're washing our hands of it's got nothing to do with us, we got the money, ha. For one thing, the city failed to look out for its citizens, its residents, its visitors, its professional drivers. So not so fast, you jerks. The other thing is something I was reminded of this weekend, last weekend, by a classmate of mine in Israel, Risa Cohn. now Risa Stone. Risa, I went to school with from, like, my God, kindergarten through grade 12. She moved to Israel immediately after high school. She's a brilliant writer. She'll be shocked I say that, I know, but she's a very good writer and very insightful and very clever. Her whole family were friends with my grandparents and my parents, and they were all very clever people. And Risa was no different from her siblings. But she points out that in what we call the Parsha, this was the Torah reading, the Bible, the Old Testament segment that was read in synagogue this past Saturday, the weekly readings. And it has to do with the building of the Mishkan, the sanctuary, when the Jews were on the road from Egypt till they got to the Holy Land. I won't get deep in the woods into the reads on that. The teaching of this, of one of the teachings from this Bible reading, is that the funds for the Mishkan, for the sanctuary, must come from a just and holy society. Ill-gotten gains are not welcome in the Mishkan. So this principle that you can't take dirty money, soiled money, scammed money, is baked right into our Judeo-Christian ethic in Parshat Truma, in that Parsha called Truma, in Jewish tradition that we just read in synagogue this past weekend. Ill-gotten gains are not welcome in the Mishkan. Ill-gotten gains should also not be welcome at 510 Main Street. Just making the point. Now, this also lands on the province, and we might as well take a swing. Kenny, we can swing over to provincial politics right now.
Let's
Still good
do
on time,
it.
right?
Yeah.
Not much to update on the provincial Conservative nomination process yet. Grant Jackson, who we spoke about previously, Larry Maguire's boy, he taken by the hand by Larry Maguire, and he handily won the PC nomination in Spruce Woods. This past week, Shannon Martin decided that he was leaving politics, as he told the Free Press, this CBC, sorry, in a very out of the ordinary kind of story in some respects. Political life, said Shannon Martin, is a lot like a relationship. You're always going to have highs and lows, and sometimes things just don't work out. You need to make that decision on the best thing for me personally and for my family, simply move on to new opportunities. In other words, having failed to win the nomination where he, back in his old bailiwick, Southern Manitoba, that he lost that nomination, he's not even going to try to win the nomination of the seat he does hold, McPhillips, where he was parachuted into the first time when his seat disappeared, and now it's reappeared, his rural seat. He's not even going to give it a try. This means 13 out of 36 Tory MLAs have left Broadway or will be leaving Broadway. The story noting that Shannon Martin never given a cabinet post, even as most other Winnipeg area Tories were. Now I got to think about which Winnipeg area Tories weren't given a cabinet post. He, of course, ran for the Tory leadership, had an aborted, so to speak, or abortive, I guess, leadership run when he couldn't generate the 1,000 memberships required for the entry level into the race. That's where Heather Stephenson took the measure of Shelley Glover. He said now here's a peculiar sentence, Kenny. Martin said he has no regrets about his political career, but did not go into detail. Huh?
What?
Now, if it was he has regrets, wouldn't go into detail. That sentence would make sense.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, said Shannon Martin. I probably rubbed a few people the wrong way, especially the powers that be. I guess he means Pallister over the years. One political analyst, get ready to start sleeping, said it was never clear why Martin holds some of the same progressive views on social issues that Stephenson does, was passed over. I don't know why he was excluded and wasn't designated to play a bigger role, said Paul Thomas. I was interviewing Paul Thomas on MTN TV in 1989, and he was old then. Now, Martin holds some of the same progressive views on social issues. Why he was passed over cabinet, that might explain it right there. How many progressives? You know, Kenny, I've noticed something.
What's that?
You often hear the term in political parties that somebody's a right-wing this and a left-wing that, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
or now in the Conservative Party, that used to be called, in going back to Joe Clark's day, a red Tory. Okay, a leaning to the left conservative as opposed to a leaning right. So you hear the term right-wing conservative all the time. You know what you never hear? Right-wing New Democrat.
Oh. Yeah.
The New
No, you don't.
The New Democrats shuffled their shadow cabinet in this past week. Wab Canoe, and if you want to have a good laugh, here's your first laugh. Concordia MLA Matt Weeb, he was a former constituency assistant for Greg. Was he a constituency assistant for Greg? Was he a constituency assistant? Was he for Selinger? Why do I think he was a constituency assistant for Gary Doerr? Anyways, he's a longtime party hack, became an MLA. He's now the new justice critic, taking over from Nahanni Fontaine, who was made family's critic. Fontaine said, Free Press story, she will be focused on issues of housing, child and family services, and poverty, and will continue as opposition House leader. Let me tell you a little something about Nahanni Fontaine and child and family services. As she was forced to admit at a town hall she walked out of during the 2016 election that I reported on, I think I might have been the only reporter there, when she walked out when the going got tough. She admitted that in 5.5 years as special advisor to the anti-white racist Eric Robinson, who was the Minister of Families, that in those 5.5 years, despite the number of families in the North End whose children had been seized under dubious, questionable, and wrong circumstances by child and family service agencies, and the mistreatment and maltreatment those families had received from the social workers, the unions involved, that universally support the NDP, Nahanni Fontaine admitted that in 5.5 years, she never once raised questions with the NDP government about the snatching of First Nations children. And now she's going to be the family services critic for Wab Canoe. That's just reeks of credibility. Meanwhile, Matt Weeb's the justice critic. Guess who isn't the justice critic? An actual lawyer that's in the NDP caucus for Gary MLA Mark Wazaloo, former chair of the Winnipeg School Division, who doesn't get education, doesn't get justice. When it says was shuffled to, he sure got the shuffle all right, from finance critic to economic development, investment and trade, and environment and climate. In other words, Mark Wazaloo, here's your big nothing burger to chew on. That's the bench strength of the NDP under Wab Canoe. The Black Rod having put up an analysis. Hey, I don't know if you saw, Kenny, your old friend Dan Lett.
Yeah.
He made the blogosphere again.
Oh, good.
Revealing the Heather Stephenson magic trick that has scared the NDP leading to the October election. This was after an opinion column from the city's king of fake news, Dan Lett, who suddenly realized his hopes and dreams may be swirling down the toilet. Now, about a week before this story ran, this blog was put up around February 21st or 22nd. So in the middle of the month, around Valentine's Day, Paul Thomas wrote a column giving the NDP advice on what it was going to take to beat the New Democrats. And 2 days later, Lett jumps on the same bandwagon. They've got a remarkable 20-point lead in Winnipeg, suggesting the coming election is Wab Canoe's to lose. But by week's end, wrote the Black Rod, in a column dripping with flop sweat, a term so archaic I had to look it up.
Flop sweat?
Flop sweat.
Really? I use that all the time.
You do? Well, Dan Lett put out a column dripping with flop sweat, putting distance between himself and his political hero, and it put a new light on his interview with Wab Canoe, because, as he wrote, the Conservatives pledging $123 million of incentives for the healthcare system and to recruit nurses. So Lett put forward the following hypothesis after being ignored and bullied for years. Yeah, like the nurses have been ignored. Will nurses forgive the NDP government, accept the incentives being offered in return? And among the expected cheap shots at the government, Lett fired an arrow to the heart of the NDP's hope. It may be exactly the right plan, but may have come at precisely the wrong time. So it appears that Dan Lett was saying the Conservatives actually came up with the right plan for a change.
But if only it was a different time. There's There's always something with these conservatives.
The point. Oh God, the point was made that Dan Lett went from declaring the NDP was a sure thing to undermining them on healthcare, and the Black Rod's conclusion was that the Black Rod column about the victory of Kevin Klein in particular, that the NDP is not generating more support in the general among the voters, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they vote in Kirkfield Park actually dropped 20%. And I realize it was a by-election that doesn't necessarily have the same numbers, but they threw out all the stops and they still fell short against Klein, who of course did have some advantages admitted, but all things being considered, Dan Lett, Asquith Canoe was overconfident in NDP victory why people didn't show up to vote. It was a referendum on health care. But the Black Rod said, without healthcare as an issue, the NDP was essentially a one-trick pony with endless harangues about Aboriginal issues. Were people reluctant to elect a, quote, premier of First Nations heritage, asked Lett. And he wrote, it will not help that the PCs will be hammering hard on Canoe's personal history before he entered politics, and in particular his run-ins with the law. Can you wisely dodge the question?
I think that goes to show you Dan Lett's mindset when he talks about Manitobans worrying about electing our first Native premier. I mean, I don't think that's an issue at all.
You think it's just the dislikability of Wap Canoe, regardless of whether he's First Nations or not?
Yeah. Like it's a personal thing, not who he is, but what he's done.
So the conclusion of the blog piece, the dogs can smell the fear because I should explain the piece opened with a colloquialism. They say dogs can smell fear, and the conclusion was the dogs can smell the fear in NDP circles and in the Winnipeg Free Press newsroom. So, in other words, based on my personal view of this, what is going on is a not very conservative platform, as Heather Stephenson is like the second coming of Hugh McFadden, and is trying to run to the left of the NDP to cobble together a mandate in the October or earlier election. Because these kinds of spending promises and the priorities of conservative government, they're very much waffling to the left, as they used to say in the old days, rather than waffling to anywhere near the right. But what do we know?
I don't know.
You have tax and spend New Democrats. You have tax and spend conservatives. The one thing you never hear is a right-wing New Democrat. Next time you hear it, please let me know, folks.
Yeah, exactly.
Off to a break, Kenny.
Let's do it.
And then we'll come back and we'll update a couple of our stories, crime courts, public safety updates. Still looking for a sponsor for that. Don't be shy. You can sponsor it for a week, a month, a particular episode. If there's an issue you want addressed, or you want to come on, do an interview with us and address it yourself, get a hold of me, martygoldlive@gmail.com. Right back after this very fast interruption.
The Great Canadian Talk Show is brought to you by The Hive Hair Company. From classic to funky, the styles of your life are at The Hive, in the heart of the Osborne Village at 175 Osborne. Call 452-4483 or online, thehivehaircompany.com.
Back with the middle part of this week's program. Thanks to all of you that have supported our podcasts and my investigative journalism, and I can obviously encourage you to continue to do so. Piece of fan mail first, then we'll get back around to it. And this is actually from somebody who has been supportive, who has actively supported this work for a number of years, starting when we were on radio, a former blogger who shall remain nameless and unidentified. I love having you back on the air. Thank you very much. Now, this came in after we mentioned the fire on Main Street, took out the old Kernhill Furniture Co-op location, right?
That's right. Regarding
Nick Hill, I'm forever reminded of Andrew Neville and the Poor Choices song, Nick Hill. Did you know there was a Nick Hill song?
I did not. This is amazing.
I've got the link, and we're going to put it in. I should have sent you the link, Kenny. Now, recently, the University of Winnipeg, and I got the press release, they have, through a grant, and I don't remember the particulars, but they've compiled and restored a number of Kernhill Furniture Co-op commercials. I believe these are all from the 80s, could be some are from the 70s with Nick Hill himself. Maybe there's some from the 90s too. Yeah, come on down. So
Come on down. That's incredible.
so there's an example of something the U of W does that's really good.
Yeah.
Something they also do that's not so good is cover up incidents of anti-Semitism. And they aren't alone, as I put out on the J.ca, Canada's national online Jewish newspaper, of which I am the editor this past week, in an update to the podcast of last week and the first story. Winnipeg Board of Jewish Education stonewalls questions about anti-Semitic incident. United wall of silence from the Board of Jewish Education, the Grey Academy, Jewish Federation, and U of W Collegiate. I don't want to go through the rest of it. You'll be able to read the story in the links. We've also prepared a highlight version of last week's podcast, an excerpt of about 20 minutes, so you can get caught up in rapid order on what went on, why this is important. I'll get back around on why this is important in a minute, as well as the updates from this past week. And this coming week in the J.ca, even more news about this, including communication from 2 government cabinet ministers with regards to what did or did not or may not have happened at a junior varsity basketball game on February 2nd. And a little more insight that we've gotten from intel in the field about what actually did occur, because nobody wants to really say what happened, who did what to who. We're getting a little closer to getting some information on that. But as the Winnipeg Free Press did, calling any behavior like this on the Jewish campus by visitors from the University of Winnipeg Collegiate a behavioral issue is a disservice to the community and does nothing to combat anti-Semitism, which is the primary concern of Canada's anti-Semitism envoy, Professor Erwin Kotler. Now, as was stated in this week's story, alone, just this one thing that happened, you might think that one nonviolent incident does not hold a place of significance for the Jewish community of Winnipeg or for the general community. But how are we to measure warning signs or celebrate the lack of incidents that the Jewish community and the general community live in harmony if we can't even get our own community to identify and expose bigotry in the first place? If the leaders in our community are gatekeeping the truth and won't stand up for us, for civil society, who will? And what's the example that was set for Jewish students that experienced the incident? It screams, sweep things under the rug and don't rock the boat too much, kids. Now, the goal is not to publicly identify the students involved, although the entire roster was still available online this week. And somebody on that University of Winnipeg team did something that was so bad that the whole team was abolished by University of Winnipeg, and everybody's clammed up about what happened. The idea here is to have our community support each other and track the frequency and severity of each of these incidents. And no federation, no board, and no mandarins at the University of Winnipeg, they alone should not have the power to silence an event like this. One other thing that's happened, Kenny, is that posting these stories online has shown me how easy it is for Jew haters to think it's a good idea to open their yaps. I don't know if I shared any of this with you, Kenny, or not.
No.
I got comments on Facebook. Let's see what side of the needles they're on. These are young men. The idea was that the Jewish players had gone and complained somewhere, and there's no actual evidence that they did. And people say, oh, it's snowflakes and this and that. Let's get them to start acting like young men. They're hoping the public coddles them so more evil could pervade them. I go, what are you talking about? Evil. Here's a comment posted in public by a person. Perhaps it's time. This is about a U of W collegiate incident, by the way. Perhaps it's time the Jews are called on the carpet for what they're taught in the Torah. I know I'm a goy to you, and that isn't working for me. So I said, what? Are you suggesting, I asked them, that what happened at the game is in any way justifiable or appropriate? And I told this person, come on the podcast. They refused. They say, I'll challenge you publicly to discuss this. I said, come on the podcast. They say no. What do I know about what your people of your ilk have done for longer than a century? I think this may definitely where the truth could start to emerge. Never said paybacks weren't going to be a bitch. So there's people in our community thinks whatever happened at the University of Winnipeg, that the Jews have it coming. Not just the Jewish students, because the point guard said or did something to the center on the U of W team or something. As a matter of doctrine, they think this was justified. And another idiot in actually a Facebook post with the second story, that was about the first one, about the U of W abolishing the team. Russian proverb, put up a meme. The Jew will always tell you what happened to him, but he won't tell you why.
What?
And then when I said, what are you talking about? Like, the Russians aren't involved in this U of W thing. Like, what? When you own and control the world but claim to be a perpetual victim. So this incident, the reporting of an incident like this, has emboldened anti-Semites in Winnipeg. Among other things, I suggested to a city councilor this week that City Hall should get involved. And they said, well, no, education is a provincial issue. I said, yeah, when those students get on buses, when they're waiting at bus stops, guess what? It's a City of Winnipeg problem. So a lot more education to be done that I'm going to have to be doing, I guess. When it comes to the nature of anti-Semitism, the nature of comments like Free Palestine, which to somebody who grew up in River Heights or in Tuxedo, some big shot in the Jewish community thinks, no, that's just somebody saying something. Yeah, well, you know what? When you're an Israeli who lives and raises a family in Canada and somebody says Free Palestine, that means that they want to murder you and all your relatives in Israel, because that's how they intend to achieve Free Palestine. So clearly there's a big gap in the understanding of our elected officials and the general community about how dangerous these comments are and what it leads to. And I'm back on the case. If you think I'm kidding, there's an incident that happened in Maryland with a school district panicking after 9 anti-Semitic incidents in 1 week. Kids being bullied, kids being beaten, kids being harassed, and a school district that did nothing because it's normalized, because anti-Semitism is not recognized under these DEI initiatives. It just doesn't quite fit, because if you treat anti-Semitism like the scourge it is, well, then I guess Jews can't be considered part of white supremacy. And it's created an entirely dangerous situation. What we see happening in the States, we see happening in Toronto, we see happening in Montreal, coming to Winnipeg. Just wondering why I make a big deal out of it? That's why. If you don't stand against it now, you're going to be overrun with it later. And as I said, from those comments online, there's a lot of people with some very rancid, abusive, obsequious views of Jewish history, of Judeo-Christian society, and of what civil society is supposed to stand for. And I personally won't stand for it. Back with more Crime Courts Public Safety Update right after this break here on the Great Canadian Talk Show podcast.
Citizen journalism is alive and well here on the Great Canadian Talk Show podcast every week, and with some intermittent midweek special commentaries and other features. We try to bring you some different perspective on what's going on in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and Canada, the national scene, as we come forward with ways of looking at things that you don't really hear from the narrative-driven corporate media, and we bring forward issues, we break stories that affect you, affect your family, and affect your neighbors. Your support is vital to the continuation of our doing this kind of work, especially because we intend to give the Manitoba provincial election of 2023 coverage like it's never seen before. To support us, you can look in the episode description, and you'll see the link to PayPal. You can also email me, martygoldlive@gmail.com, for advertising, sponsorship, what have you. Your support is vital to ensure that this work continues, and this work is vital to ensure that Winnipeg has a full, honest, and insightful discussion on the matters that are affecting us and our community. And with your help, we're going to be able to continue to do so strongly all throughout 2023.
Back with the final segment of episode 12, season 2. Marty Gold with Superior to Kenny. I just want to mention during the break, I had it confirmed that the highlight excerpts of the originating, the exclusive story that I broke about the University of Winnipeg Collegiate abolishing the junior varsity boys basketball team. We had that on the podcast last week, and now there's a nice short, tight version you could listen to. That was during the course of the break. I confirmed that has now been put online, and there's a description. A specific description. I'm going to put that link in here. And so you'll be able to read it. It'll have links to the 2 stories so far that I mentioned in this podcast. And it gives you an idea of of the kind of work that I do, not just in the realm of anti-Semitism, in the realm of the Jewish community, in the realm of public safety, because all these things are tied in, but obviously on broader subjects. And right now, there's a very specific appeal going on. I'm hoping to put together a fund of $9,000. That's $1,000 a month every month. That's like $1,000 a month every month till the end of the year, to be able to cover what's going on in schools in Winnipeg, in Manitoba, and across Canada when it comes to the abuse of Jewish students, Jewish staff too, right? I want to focus on schools, on elementary schools and high schools, not so much on universities. That's turf that's being well trod by some brilliant people, Honest Reporting Canada and B'nai B'rith and other organizations in Eastern Canada. Nobody's doing this kind of research. It's important. This involves our kids, and I want to be able to dedicate my time to it. So that's what we're doing right now. That's incorporated into the link that I'm providing, the description of the podcast. It's a newsletter from the J.ca that we've sent to all the people who are signed up on our subscription list, which is well over 1,000. I'd be glad to have you subscribe to the J.ca. Lots of other great content, including from stories from Toronto, stories from America, Israel, Azerbaijan, the United Kingdom, all over the world. We cover the scene, and your support in particular for me being able to stay on the beat and to be a working journalist is much appreciated. And so please hop on the bandwagon and give us the support we need, because on top of the work that I'm doing in that realm with Spirit of Kenny, we're going to be covering the 2023 provincial election, the way we did the civic election, in a manner that's going to be unmatched by any of the corporate newsrooms, any of the Trudeau-funded newsrooms. That's them. That's not us. We are going to bring you the truth. We're going to bring you stories that matter. We're going to bring you information that nobody else dares reveal, such as what's behind the University of Winnipeg Collegiate abolishing the junior boys varsity basketball team. Now, as I mentioned earlier, here in Machetyville, there's an apartment building. There's the old women's hospital on one side of the street on Notre Dame at the Emily, where they about 15 years ago probably they put up traffic lights. Years ago there were none. And straight down the block is going north is the back end of the Health Sciences Center, the old emergency room entrance, etc. Police came across, got a report of two people fighting on Pearl. Oh, I should mention, so on one side of the street is the women's hospital, the old women's hospital. On the other side of the street are apartments that are populated by residents, nurses, doctors, it was part of the Health Sciences campus. Right there on the street, right beside where doctors and nurses live. Report of a fight. Two people, one armed with a machete. Bloodied. A trail. Oh, God. A witness told the Free Press he called 911 after noticing a trail of blood as the wounded man stumbled across Notre Dame near Pearl. This actually happened across the street from that residence. And then he comes across because he's trying to make his way to Health Sciences Center. He was the first of two people to be assaulted with a machete by a group of suspects in the Daniel McIntyre area.
Oh, man.
This would be right near, from the sounds of it, right near Roland Penner Park, which is one of the most dangerous parks, has been in the past in Winnipeg. Hospital staff and paramedics got to the sidewalk to treat this unfortunate fellow. Yes, officers got a call, a report of two males fighting in the 600 block of Notre Dame. So basically right by the Maryland Hotel, KFC, machete, sure. The machete-wielding male fled before officers arrived. While investigating, police learned of a group of people involved in the incident, assaulted a woman in her 30s with the machete. While they fled the scene on Notre Dame, she didn't report any injuries, was seemingly unharmed. Well, that's a miracle.
Yeah.
You ready for this, Kenny?
Shoot.
Crimes involving machetes are not specifically tracked by Winnipeg police.
Well, no, because they're just like large knives, so they probably have a category.
Knives accounted for 11% of violent crimes involving a weapon. 1 in 5 knife crimes could not be solved because the victim did not want to participate. That's the new word for cooperate. And the Free Press story also mentions the attack in St. James by the machete-wielding fellow. Actually, Kenny, I guess this proves your point that people get on from earlier in the program. You're right. People do get on buses with machetes, because that guy got off a bus and hacked a 52-year-old, giving him life-altering injuries on Ness and Mount Royal on February 9th. And might I add, I don't know that this was reported anywhere. That is within walking distance of the home of, guess who? Mayor Scott Gillingham.
That's so bad.
Ain't good. Another story this week I want to jump on, and we talked about this during the civic election coverage about the award-winning Centre Village housing complex at 575 Balmoral, surrounded with fencing, the orange-colored buildings, because in the old days, they may have been rooming houses, but they were functional. They had proper supervision. People lived there on very low income. And then the city said, no, you have to upgrade this, upgrade that. We'll give you a ticket if you do it. We'll give you a ticket if you don't do it. And the next thing you know, down it goes. And the award-winning architects get their hands on the project. And $3 million plus later, what do you end up with? Breaking in the fence lately. And now you've got squatters. You've got drugs going on, all sorts of public disorder. Nobody in their right mind, said an area resident who lives across the street named Jason Keenan. Nobody in their right mind would build a property like that in this neighborhood. There's so many cubbyholes and hiding places for drug users and stuff. If anybody knew anything about this area, they would never have built that thing. It doesn't fit in this neighborhood. But the architects won awards. Now, a reminder that The Guardian in 2016 called it apartments poorly suited to family life, and a building structure seems to act as a magnet for drinking and drug taking at all hours. That's because the kitchens, they didn't have a view of the courtyard. And just a stupid-looking complex, $3.7 million, including $1.5 million in grants for the provincial and federal governments, open in 2010. The tenants started to leak away because it was not suitable housing for immigrant families. They couldn't watch their kids in the courtyard. I think they're 3 stories, just a pain in the ass all the way around. People moved out. Keenan's lived across the street for 7 years. Even getting the fence installed took years. A few months ago, 8 people were pulled out of the building by security and apprehended by police. And once the fence wasn't repaired by Manitoba Housing, the trouble started again. For the other neighbors, he says he called Manitoba Housing, and he's been told to call the police. When he called the police in Central Park, they don't show up that fast. It's a Manitoba Housing project. Nobody's living in it. Taxpayer money is going towards a building that they're now trying to sell. They're allowing vagrants to stay in and destroy. As of February 1st, there were 5,423 people waiting for subsidized housing on Manitoba Housing's wait list. And they're leaving this get destroyed. As Mr. Keenan, a brave individual, told the media, if this was out in Charleswood, one of these new developments or something like that, the police would be out there, the community would be all over it. Nobody does anything about it. Police are in the 500 block of Balmoral, dispatched once every day and a half on average. It used to be more until Murder Mansion burned down.
That's how we solve problems here. They just burn down the buildings.
I don't think that's in Manitoba Housing's mandate to let properties go derelict, but time and again we've seen it through different levels of government, and this is what happens. You have self-perpetuating bureaucracies.
Yeah.
And when you have no political will, and it's the fault of all political parties.
Yeah, it's really a missed opportunity to help some people.
They don't want to help people. They want to help themselves. They could have solved this problem years ago. The first way they could have solved the problem is tell everybody involved in and it came from originally from Knox United Church, and then it was supposed to be housing specifically for, I'm trying to remember, it was tied in with a Muslim charity or something, and that idea wasn't going to work. I'm not going to say it's perfectly good housing. It wasn't perfectly good housing, but it was usable housing that a private landlord was taking care of. And granted, that was like 25 years ago. There's no reason to think that it couldn't have been handled by the private sector. Instead, $1.5 million in government grants, and it's sitting empty. And this is only after 13 years. Listen, some neighborhoods in the city, they fall into decay over a period of 20 years, 30 years. This took half the time. But not before the architects got their award for an idea that was stupid.
Award-winning.
Pats on the back. Ribbons cut.
Great job, everyone. We solved the problem.
Yeah, great job, everyone. Lastly, since we talk about crime and courts and public safety, we've talked about crime. We've talked about public safety. We'll fill in the courts right now. There's a fellow when he was 16, killed his mother, bludgeoned her in her bed when he was 16. He was convicted by a jury in a very unusual move. The judge last month rejected a motion by the Crown to sentence the man as an adult. The jury convicted him in June 2022 of second-degree murder. He was on trial for first-degree murder. It's very rare for a jury verdict to be overturned, and normally appeal courts will uphold them. This fellow's gotten a sentence, the maximum. No, they want to sentence him as an adult. A judge said no. He gave him the maximum use sentence of 7 years custody, 3 of which are served in the community. He's appealing it. And as according to sources of the Free Press, retained James Lockyer, who has been known to get all sorts of people off of various heinous crimes. This was a sad story of a family that was deeply dysfunctional. The night before the killing, he bought his mother flowers, made her dinner, all part of a ruse to divert attention from himself, according to the newspaper report. Pretended to be running errands and texting his mother after he had killed her the next morning.
What a guy.
She had been dependent on him from the age of 14. The mother had manifest health problems. It was a shared custody with the former husband. So it's a bad family dynamic. You know what? Nobody's asked in this story. And as I said, now this is being appealed like being sentenced to the maximum sentence as a child when he could easily have been sentenced as an adult with the degree of premeditation and alibi invention. And he's appealing that. But you know what I haven't heard discussed? Where was the help for this family? Where was the help for this child? Where was the school? And I'm just asking, the school counselors, CFS, healthcare professionals. How did this happen? I haven't seen that addressed. The courts won't be addressing it. They'll be addressing what is a fair and proper sentence. But when you look at the details, and I'm leaving it out, including how he used bleach to clean up the crime scene, disposed the murder weapon, the level of violence, in my opinion, even the 7 years of consequence are not, in my opinion, sufficient to provide deterrence and to provide a sense of safety for the community at large. And I'm going to be following this case through the appeal process when it comes up. It's a terrible story, but this was an example of a family that needed help. And hey, maybe Nahanni Fontaine will bring it up, right? Family Services, maybe she'll start asking questions about the case because the sentence has been rendered. She can talk about it in the legislature. But she won't because it happened in Charleswood. It doesn't involve people whose votes she's trying to curry. And nobody's going to bring this up, but this is an example of what happens when the system, granted, this is a terrible case, but this was falling apart from the time the kid was 14, 15, 16, and he was 16 when he committed it. So there's got to be some other accountability along the way. I don't know if there's going to be an inquest or inquiry held in this or not, but certainly not what gives confidence in either the courts, the overturning of the jury verdict, not on appeal, but by the trial judge, and not sentencing this fellow as an adult. And as I said, we're going to keep an eye on this case. So sad situation. And I'd like to hear some, again, verdict's been rendered. It's in appeal. I think they can talk about it while it's in appeal. I don't think maybe some lawyer out there can let me know, but I don't think that it's out of bounds for legislators to talk about what can we do to improve legislation to help families before they end up with this kind of a tragedy underneath their own roof. It's just horrible situation, compounded, in my opinion, by the courts not imposing a just sentence.
Hey, Marty.
Kenny?
How often does this type of violence get flagged beforehand and should have been stopped? This should have been seen before.
I don't know how often. I mean, this is there's a technical term for killing your father, killing your mother, killing your brothers, fratricide. I don't remember what it would be for matricide. It is rare, But that's the level of murder is rare, but to the level of like family violence, not unheard of. I don't know how common it is, and I don't really know. Geez, I've never thought of where the stats are, but you've raised a good question that I don't have an answer to. How often, how could the system be improved to get families the help they need? And what should that help be? Because is this, and maybe there needs to be coordination between the community groups these families might be involved in, whether they're, the churches or other service groups or something. I don't know. But the warning signs, I haven't read anything that there weren't warning signs that this kid was troubled.
Yeah.
And surely to God, the school guidance counselor, somebody must have noticed something. It's not, I don't see anywhere in the free press reporting or any of the other reporting I can recall that, well, he was drinking or he had a drug problem. It could be that was part of it too. But even that should have been flagged. It's just a tragedy. And
as a 14-year-old looking after your mother, that's a pretty heavy burden.
What do they call it? Home care. Where were they in this situation? And maybe they were supposed to be there and they weren't. I don't know. Anyways, that's your Crime Court's public safety update. Again, I want to thank you all for listening, for sharing these episodes. We're going to continue to put out excerpts, highlights from the different podcasts and send them out. If you want to get put on our mailing list, martygoldlive@gmail.com, the link for PayPal donations. And again, the specific fundraising campaign that we're putting on now, that's also in the link in this in the episode description. Your support is integral. It's vital. Nobody else covers the stories we cover, whether it's at the city level, the provincial level, whether it's in the realm of the work that I do with the J.ca. It's absolutely vital that if you value this information, if you think it's important these things are being talked about. I can tell you I got a phone call from an elected politician in Winnipeg this past week with regards to my coverage of what's going on with the University of Winnipeg Collegiate, specifically thanking me for going public. They indicated they had knowledge of this shortly after the team was abolished and said to themselves, oh, the shit's going to hit the fan. And nothing happened, and they couldn't believe the media didn't cover this story. And I was told by an elected official in Manitoba, this is in fact important to talk about. It is important to discuss. It is important to ask for accountability from the schools involved. If you agree with that, please consider supporting this work, whether it's through sponsorships, advertising, public speaking engagements, what have you. We're here for you. Help keep us on the road towards the provincial election in 2023 in October. Any final words, Kenny?
Stay safe on those buses. Maybe just stand right next to the exit at all times.
Maybe don't wait for the bus at a bus stop, but wait 50 feet away and run over in a wave when you see it coming up.
Yeah. Just sit on the driver's lap. I think that's probably the safest spot.
Behind the shield, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Who knows? That might be coming next. That's all from us. Also join our Facebook group, The Great Canadian Talk Show on Facebook. Always remember, never forget, as I was reminded this weekend, you have the power.
Thanks for listening to The Great Canadian Talk Show. If you want to email Marty, send it to tgcts1@gmail.com or follow him on Twitter @TGCTS.